There has been perhaps no other topic in the realm of lost ancient history that has garnered more controversy over the last year than Göbekli Tepe. And as many of you may recall, I made a series of videos addressing an assortment of highly controversial issues pertaining to the world's oldest and what is arguably the most mysterious ancient site on Earth, including the inexplicable lack of excavations and that only 5 to 10% of this site has been excavated over the last 30 years, and combined with the bizarre announcement involving their intention to drastically slow excavations moving forward, stating that future digs will be limited in contrast to the large-scale excavations of years past. In fact, they have described that they are passing down a full excavation to, and I quote, future generations, with a bewilderingly slow 150-year time frame before excavations are now intended to be complete. I'm sorry, but this is completely and totally unacceptable, as Göbekli Tepe is one of the oldest sites on Earth and stands to potentially answer essential questions pertaining to our unknown ancient origins. And no true archaeologist, academic, historian, or enthusiast of ancient history could possibly be content on living the rest of their lives not knowing what's buried and waiting to be discovered at Göbekli Tepe. But I also discussed in my prior videos the documented evidence of ancient ruins that were damaged at Göbekli Tepe during the installation of various infrastructure that was built for tourism a handful of years ago. A hastily and reckless construction which is now literally covering the heart of this ancient site and thus obstructing a full excavation. A prime example of what happens when the focus of increasing tourism revenues supersedes archaeological excavation, which, by the way, as I've mentioned before, all of this infrastructure began as soon as the Doges Group signed a 20-year partnership deal to fund excavations and facilitate the growth of tourism at this site, which that in itself resulted in various conspiracies related to who now controls Göbekli Tepe through the power of funding. But perhaps the most notable of concerns was the fact that orchards of olive trees were planted on top of ancient ruins surrounding the site, further preventing a full excavation as the trees would have to be removed to do so. But even more concerning, posing a critical danger of damaging the ruins, as tree roots are notorious for penetrating basements, destroying urban infrastructure including roads, sidewalks, sewer pipes, and even the foundation of homes, to name a few examples. And by the way, since my last video on the topic, it was confirmed that the roots of those olive trees were indeed damaging the ruins at Göbekli Tepe, just as I had suggested that they would. A complete and total archaeological blunder that should never have happened in the first place, and which leaves many questions that still need to be answered. And that will be the topic of my entire next video, as there is a lot of new information to share about this situation, the details of which I know you will find very interesting. However, having just traveled to several different ancient sites in Turkey, I observed something that was far more disturbing than anything I had shared in my prior videos on Göbekli Tepe. Now, let me first say that simply traveling to Turkey, and specifically the site of Göbekli Tepe, was something that I was rather concerned about after certain statements that were made from authorities within Turkey. As I shared in my prior video, a Dr. Necmi Kurul, the head of archaeology for the Turkish ministry, was quoted in news articles suggesting that I should be, quote, sanctioned for making what he called false claims about the archaeological condition of Göbekli Tepe, and he went on to say later in that interview that I will be sanctioned. Which, of course, left me wondering, what exactly did he mean by sanction? Do they intend to ban me from Göbekli Tepe or perhaps the country of Turkey entirely? Because travel bans are most commonly what a sanction would involve. And let's be real, it would be rather dreadful to make plans and spend money on a long-haul flight to Turkey only to be turned around when entering the country through passport control at the Istanbul airport, which, although I felt was unlikely, I really had no way of knowing for sure unless I took the chance to go and find out. However, I am pleased to say that I went through with no issue at all. But I figured that if there was one place in all of Turkey that I would be recognized, it would be at Göbekli Tepe, as I know for a fact that those who oversee the excavation at that site know exactly who I am, and it's fair to say that they are not fans of me at all. So the obvious decision was for me to put on a hat and sunglasses and visit the site incognito to help mitigate the chance of being recognized and kicked out, because again, it would really suck to travel 8,000 miles from home all the way over to Sanliurfa, Turkey, only to be asked to leave the one site I needed to visit and document above all else. So yeah, I am rather amused to say that I more or less snuck into Göbekli Tepe so I could have the chance to share everything I saw with all of you. And honestly, they probably should have banned me when they had the chance, because I basically went there with the intention of conducting an archaeological audit of sorts to evaluate the entire situation with my own eyes and, of course, my camera lens. So this video is part one, and I'm going to share a number of alarming and disturbing things with you. And my next video will be part two, which will really put the nail in the coffin to show that there is something incredibly wrong happening at Göbekli Tepe, and the entire world has a right to know what it is. So with all of that said, let's just get into it. Let me first start with something rather significant that I noticed while examining the site, which involves the infrastructure that I've discussed previously, particularly involving this massive roof and viewing platform that was built literally on the top of the heart of Göbekli Tepe. Notice that it surrounds the main enclosures of T-pillars, and the platform itself extends over portions of the ruins which have not yet been excavated. Not only is this platform obstructing a full excavation of the site, as I've repeatedly stated, but it's literally blocking the site itself from being fully viewed or appreciated, which inhibits most of those who are less informed from realizing just how much more of the site is waiting to be unearthed, as these large viewing platforms hinder the perspective. But these details led me to notice something specific involving the dozens of steel beams that were planted directly into the bedrock foundation of the site itself in order to erect the structure. Let's ignore the part that these steel beams create a total eyesore for attaining an adequate photo of the site, and let's instead take a closer look at where these beams are planted into the ground, where holes were drilled into the heart of the ancient ruins that make up this site, which again, much of which isn't even excavated, as you can see from all the surrounding rubble. The truth is that they built this thing long before further excavations should have taken place, and tourism was ultimately made the priority over excavations, hence why they have no intention to fully excavate it for practically hundreds of years. But notice just how close these steel beams are located to the ruins. Surely great precautions must have been taken before drilling the holes that would house these steel beams, which of course would have been filled with poured concrete to establish the structural foundation. And notice that one of these beams comes quite close to pillar number 43, the most widely discussed relic at Göbekli Tepe. So here's a very sincere question. Were any ancient ruins damaged during the drilling of these dozens of holes that would later hold these steel beams? Hold that thought, as you will soon see exactly why I would ask that question. As I mentioned, I visited numerous ancient sites while visiting Turkey, including Karahan Tepe, the magnificent sister site of Göbekli Tepe located not far away. And the timing of this visit in March 2025 was exceptional, as we were there to witness the initial groundwork for what will soon become a massive roof that will be constructed over this site, just as they did at Göbekli Tepe, along with a state-of-the-art visitor center which is now under construction, all in an effort to quickly facilitate the growth of tourism revenue. And here are a few animated examples of what the roof will look like at Karahan Tepe when it's completed in the coming months. Now, let me first say that Karahan Tepe is a fascinating site which is worthy of a fully informative video of its own involving this site's history. But in this video today, I must unfortunately shift focus to the abhorrent archaeological tragedy that is now underway at this site, which involves the construction of this new roof they are building. First, take a look at these various aerial photos of Karahan Tepe, which were taken in just the last few weeks. And notice these dozen or so holes that surround the site, which are now covered in large wooden planks. These holes were drilled to house the steel beams which will be installed to support the new roof. Well, by incredibly favorable timing, I just so happened to have visited Karahan Tepe shortly after these holes were drilled. And I got to see them up close, and most importantly, before they had cleaned up the debris that were dug out of these holes. As an example, notice the remaining piles of dirt that are located next to the drilled out holes, which have not yet been hauled off. And now let's take a closer look at these holes from on the ground, and in fact, let's watch this short video filmed by my friend Michael Collins of the Wandering Wolf YouTube channel, who I toured the site with. And look at just how deep these holes go. I estimate a solid 18 to 20 feet or 6 meters. far deeper than I was expecting. Yeah, you would not want to fall down into one of these holes, which, by the way, I counted at least 11 of them. Now, real quick, go subscribe to Mike's channel as he is releasing incredible videos on what we witnessed at these sites in Turkey, including some incredible revelations we observed at Gobekli Tepe, and his video on that is out now, and it is honestly a must-see. And also, subscribe to my friend Nikki of the Nikki Anna Jones YouTube channel, as we all traveled for a full week in Turkey together, and if it wasn't for Mike and Nikki, my trip in March would not have been possible, and I cannot begin to tell you just how incredibly important the timing was, as you're about to see in my next two videos, including this one. Because the part I'm going to show you now is where I witnessed something that was far more disturbing than anything I had discussed in my prior videos on Göbekli Tepe. Take a look at additional photos of these holes as seen from the ground. As I mentioned, you can see the piles of dirt that had been removed when the holes were drilled out, and you can also see piles of stones that were removed along with the dirt during this process. And also observe that you can see the tops of unexcavated T-pillars emerging from the ground right over areas where this platform will be built on top of, and right next to many of these drilled out holes. There are numerous examples of unexcavated T-pillars like this surrounding the perimeter of this site, which has not yet been excavated. Make no mistake, a vast majority of this entire site is still underground, as only a small portion of it has received any excavation, far less so than at Göbekli Tepe. Make no mistake, the platform is being built in a rush to create infrastructure for tourism revenue, which is clearly far too premature, as this site has not been appropriately excavated and they're about to build right on top of unexcavated ruins. How could anyone in the archaeological community possibly support this? But believe it or not, this is the least of my concerns, as what I'm going to show you now goes back to the question I had asked about Göbekli Tepe as to whether any ruins were damaged during the installation of those steel beams that are penetrating deep into the ground. Well, what do we see here? You can observe three different piles that have been made. One is the pile of dirt, the second is a pile of stone, and the third is a pile of destructed 12,000-year-old priceless stone relics, which I am sorry to tell you were in the ground where these holes were drilled and subsequently damaged or destroyed. That's right, ancient ruins were indeed damaged in the process. And if they had simply further excavated the site before rushing to build something for the purposes of tourism, this would not have happened. I mean, none of us need a PhD in archaeology to know that by drilling deep into an unexcavated ancient site would pose a great risk of destroying any potential ruins which lay buried below. And again, let me remind you that the tops of unexcavated T-pillars are found all around the vicinity of a number of these holes. They absolutely should have known better. And honestly, this is an extremely disappointing archaeological blunder, which, by the way, is honestly not even the fault of archaeologists, but of whomever the managers and key decision makers are that hastily chose to start building the infrastructure at this site long before excavations should have been made. Archaeology was clearly not the priority when they chose to build this thing. Again, look and think for yourselves. You can clearly see the piles of dirt, the piles of separated stone, and then the piles of separated ancient ruins which have now been destructed. How are archaeologists ever going to piece all this back together so we can accurately study this site and the meaning and purpose of it? The significance of this archaeological travesty cannot be overstated. It's one thing to plant trees on top of buried ruins, but it's entirely something else to drill 20-foot deep holes into a field of buried ancient ruins. And by the way, although I'm sure that whoever chose to do this had hoped that this wouldn't happen, but the architectural reality is that when it comes to embedding foundational support beams to create a large structure, they have to go in very specific places in order to uphold the structural integrity of the construction itself. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if not one single archaeologist was involved in the planning of this roof. Because honestly, I cannot imagine any archaeologist thinking that drilling a dozen or so 20-foot deep holes right into a field of unexcavated ruins would be a good idea. Now, as I mentioned, the timing of my visit could not have been more exceptional, as it's likely that the window to have witnessed this archaeological blunder likely only lasted a few days or weeks at the most. But it only gets worse because get this, I know firsthand that they had attempted to prevent the public from becoming aware of these holes, as on-site security specifically instructed us to not take any photos or videos of these holes. The guy literally stated that it is, quote, prohibited. And to be honest, I still would have taken the photos anyway, but the truth is that we had already taken the photos and videos prior to being told that we weren't allowed to. And that was simply due to our small group having split up, and he was taking turns visiting us around different parts of the site at different times. So unfortunately for him, we beat him to it, and he never had any idea. And I honestly have absolutely no regrets for possessing these photos and videos. But think about that. They literally created a new rule to prohibit any photos or videos of these holes from being documented. Ask yourself, why would they feel the need to create a new rule in the first place? Well, it's obviously because they knew they screwed up while drilling these holes, as they destroyed priceless 12,000-year-old ruins at one of the oldest and most mysterious ancient sites on Earth in the process. So let me ask again the same question I asked a few moments ago, which were any ancient relics damaged or destroyed when they drilled these same type of holes at Göbekli Tepe? And by the way, you may find it interesting to know that they had completely shut down Göbekli Tepe to tourists while they constructed this roof back in 2017. I can find no photos or videos of the construction process other than this one photo right here. And when you consider the proximity of these steel beams to the ancient stones at Göbekli Tepe, it's hard to imagine that something similar hadn't occurred here as well. But we may never know, and honestly, they would probably deny it anyways, as that's exactly what they did when the wife of the late Klaus Schmidt, the archaeologist who first began excavations at Göbekli Tepe, before his passing in 2014, as she had adamantly claimed that ancient ruins were indeed damaged during the building of this infrastructure at Göbekli Tepe. And keep in mind that she herself is an archaeologist who had worked at Göbekli Tepe alongside her husband. So she knows exactly what she's talking about. Yet the authorities in Turkey went on an aggressive campaign to deny the allegations she had made. Think about that. But as far as confirmed ancient damaged ruins go, Karahan Tepe is not the only site that I witnessed this at while visiting sites in Turkey. As the little-known site of Sayburc, another sister site of Göbekli Tepe, which has 11 to 12,000-year-old ruins, is also being massively mistreated. Wait till you see this. This site is on the side of a road in the middle of an impoverished neighborhood, and it is the victim of what can only be described as egregious archaeological neglect. Ruins have been thrown about and are scattered everywhere. In fact, trash has consumed the site, and efforts to reconstruct the fallen T-pillars was ineffective, as a number of them have since toppled over. And the overall vibe I felt while visiting Sayburc is that it has been neglected by archaeologists, which is so unfortunate because it's just as old as Göbekli Tepe and may stand to answer questions about our lost ancient past. However, I will say that I am incredibly grateful that I was afforded the opportunity to actually touch these ancient relics with my own hands. And yes, I was exceptionally careful. And by the way, no, I did not trespass. There were no signs, fences, or barriers of any kind. This site is just rotting along the side of a road where kids and farm animals come and go as they please. In fact, they even threw a dirty diaper into it. That's just sad. But the true concern, once again, involves the roof, which is now covering this site as you see here, which was built in just the last few months, as I confirmed with an archaeologist that it wasn't there as recently as just this last November when his spouse, a fellow archaeologist, had visited. But it wasn't until I had gotten home from Turkey and was going through the thousands of photos I had taken at all the sites that I visited while there that I came across something that I hadn't noticed in person, and it's actually quite disturbing. Notice the red steel beam that is extending vertically downwards, and notice that what it's touching. Do you see that? It appears that that steel rod is penetrating straight through this 12,000-year-old pillar in an exceptionally shoddy attempt to support this new roof. Now, to be fair, I cannot say for sure one way or the other as to whether it's actually piercing through the stone pillar and extending down into the ground beneath it, or whether it's resting all the weight from the roof on top of it. Take a look at these cropped photos to give you a better look and leave a comment on what you think is occurring here. But regardless of whether it's penetrating the stone or using it as weighted structural support, it is absolutely damaging this nearly 12,000-year-old pillar. And what we can all say for sure is that it is an absolute fact that this is an egregious violation of archaeological standards and protocols, and you do not need a PhD in archaeology to understand that. It is a shame that I did not notice this while on site, as there were many points of focus that grabbed our attention, and I simply captured these photos by chance while I orbited the perimeter of the site, as I wanted to document it from a full 360-degree perspective, and I am certainly grateful that I did. I just hope that others will visit this site soon and document it in detail so we can all properly ascertain the damage to this pillar. Now, I am eager to share all the details I saw while I visited Göbekli Tepe, and I am very much looking forward to my next video on this. But to be honest, the situation there is actually far worse than even I was expecting. You won't want to miss my next video, or even my next few videos, as I went to a number of ancient sites, and the content of which I know you will find to be rather fascinating. But leave a comment and share your thoughts on all the details I shared in this video involving Karahan Tepe and Sayburc, as the blatant ongoing destruction of 12,000-year-old ruins must be called out and addressed. The archaeological authorities within Turkey must address this and prevent any further destruction, as this is totally inexcusable in 2025, and this type of thing should not be happening. And our entire focus should be on excavating these 12,000-year-old ruins in hopes that we can learn more about the origins of human civilizations. That must become priority number one. Now, my name is Jimmy Corsetti. My channel is called Bright Insight. Hit the like button and subscribe, and of course leave a comment to share all your thoughts. But stay tuned, as I'll have my next video out, part 2 of Göbekli Tepe, in the next couple weeks. Take care, everybody.